Welcome to the Grand Theft World podcast, hosted and sponsored by GrandTheftWorld.com. This is episode 117. It's January 29th, 2023. And this week in Grand Theft World news, we've got stories like this to cover. There's this Paul Pelosi thing that's been going on for several weeks, involving a hammer and a guy named David. The body cam footage was released. You can see David clearly breaking in the back door. You can see the officers answering the front door. There's a lot more to cover on that, but it still leaves more questions unanswered about the situation.
Hi, how you doing?
How are you?
What's going on, man?
Everything's good.
Hi. Drop the hammer.
Nope. Hey.
What is going on right
I'm
now?
not getting an answer on call back.
Remember when NBC News removed this story about Paul Pelosi and suspended the reporter? Luckily, I had saved it.
After a knock and announce, the front door was opened by Mr. Pelosi. The 82-year-old did not immediately declare an emergency or try to leave his home.
So how is that account different than what we can see now? Why did the network remove it? Who demanded action be taken to memory hole the Pelosi attack story? Yet another attempt by network news to control the narrative.
We're also going to see stories like this past week, Whitney Webb got to feature her books, One Nation Under Blackmail, Volumes 1 and 2, on the Russell Brand podcast. So now millions and millions of people are getting that very necessary story that you guys got here many months ago in a 4-hour-long form, uncut, no censorship format. Little slices of that knowledge are now making it out to the general public.
The aspect of these crimes is, of course, independently heinous enough and exploitative in a manner that's almost difficult to conceive of in terms of its scale and scope and geographical reach and the number of people involved. But it appears that this is also merely one component, and in fact is an aspect of this is the use of this criminal activity in order to create ties that are connected to power. Am I correct? And where is it, Whitney, that all of this is going? Because it seems to me that you're handling a great deal of information and a great deal of energy, and that you have a sense yourself that you're very close to how global power really operates.
Well, that was my whole effort of the book. I wrote 1,000 pages. It's 2 volumes. The second volume focuses on Epstein, and the first volume focuses on how this happened and how this network that enabled Epstein essentially came into existence. And what I'm trying to do there is really just interrogate the power structures that are essentially running most of the Western world, and of course the Western world, particularly U.S. empire, has client states around the world. In other words, this would be the power structure of most of the world today. And essentially what you have are major elements of organized crime and intelligence agencies, mainly in the U.S., U.K., and Israel, that essentially fused during, the World War II and the immediate post-World War era. And a lot of really crazy things have gone on. And essentially what I found is that history is littered with figures just like Jeffrey Epstein. He was not an anomaly at all, like we've been told by mainstream media. And thus, it's probably likely that people swimming in these elite circles for several decades, found this type of activity in which Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were engaged to be perfectly normal. And actually, there's reports in 2003, and I think the Evening Standard and other UK outlets that openly talk about Ghislaine Maxwell training young blonde girls and techniques and brandishing whips at parties. People knew about this well before Epstein was arrested the first time, and nothing was done. And you even have the wife of the deceased Senator John McCain in the United States, Cindy McCain, saying in early January 2020, we all knew what he was doing, talking about Epstein. So this was known and nothing was done.
It's extraordinary. So it seems like it would be impossible to have a significant connection to Jeffrey Epstein and not know what he was doing. Overtly and explicitly, Jeffrey Epstein then is a realtor, a fixer, a global playboy. But the nature of his connections means what? That he's integrally involved in the true structures of power that are usually concealed from ordinary people.
Yeah, to an extent. I think he was really sort of a middle management figure who was sort of linking top tiers of this power structure and with, people on the ground actually enacting a lot of these operations, policies and corrupt acts. And of course, him himself being intimately involved in several acts of corruption. As well. And ultimately, I think the reason the financial crimes are not discussed is because that's getting to the bottom of a lot of things that are still ongoing to this very day. And there's a lot of powerful interests that definitely don't want that coming out. And if you look at, for example, when efforts have been made to investigate the tie of Epstein and Wall Street banks, most recently with this situation in the Virgin Islands, the Attorney General was fired after trying to file suit against Deutsche Bank, I believe, for their relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. And the previous attempt to prosecute that in a U.S. court saw the judge's son assassinated, essentially, by someone that had previously worked for an intelligence-linked outfit called Kroll Associates. So there's a whole lot of crazy stuff there. And so why was I think it's pretty clear why the mainstream media won't touch this one if that's how it happened, that's how it's played out on the legal side.
I suppose we all have a sense that there are elite and inaccessible organizations that primarily are connected around the administration of power, the acquisition of profit, the manipulation of the media agenda, the top American political figures, significant corporate figures across the globe. Some of the world's most powerful billionaires have connections and relationships that are illicit. And of course, the nature of this story suggests that there is a component, that's a significant part of it. One of the other aspects of this is that I keep hearing people connected to this story die in mysterious circumstances. And then, of course, Jeffrey Epstein's death in custody doesn't seem to be entirely straightforward. What's your impression there, Whitney?
Of Epstein's death, I definitely think the official story is totally insane and very difficult to believe. And essentially, it's very hard to know what happened that day because the guards were asleep, the cameras didn't work, and all these different things, went wrong. And it's just a very difficult story to believe, especially if you believe the official story of how he allegedly hung himself after being on suicide watch with paper-thin sheets. And he's a tall guy. A lot of it doesn't really add up. And ultimately, if you look at other people in the Epstein case, for example, Mark Middleton, who I mentioned earlier, who was frequently meeting with Epstein at the White House around 94 and 1995, in May of last year, he was found hanging by the neck by an extension cord and a shotgun blast to the chest. A couple months after the Daily Mail published the visitor logs between him and Epstein and revealed that what was thought to be 5 visits was really closer to 17. And the local Arkansas court blocked all media and all files related to Middleton's death from being released, and it was ruled a suicide. So you tell me how likely it is that someone hung themselves and at the same time they shot themselves in the chest with a shotgun, and how likely that was actually a suicide as authorities maintain.
Occasionally these stories occur that reveal the true nature of power, and it makes me a bit scared, to tell you the truth, Whitney. Do you sometimes feel like, hold on a minute, if I keep talking about this stuff on the internet and write books about it, it's pretty clear that I'm in some risks. Do you ever feel that, mate?
So there's the network I trace in the book has been reported by previous journalists who had things happen to them, like Gary Webb and Danny Casolaro. But I think today the media, the powers that be are more likely to paint me as just a conspiracy theorist and ignore me than, go to all the effort of coming all the way to South America and executing some sort of hit or something like that. And ultimately, I feel that if you live in fear of these people, you're giving them power over you and power over your life. And if your goal is to free yourself and your family and ultimately the world from this type of corrupt power establishment, we should not be giving them power.
Also on another big platform, Joe Rogan hosted Dr. Jordan Peterson, who has come under attack lately for freedom of speech issues. And he had some freedom of speech for the World Economic Forum. how he's now calling out, and again, giving a larger platform through Joe Rogan's audience to get that information out there. These topics you've heard about on this podcast for years now, but it's good that the general population, the Gen Pop in the prison here, is getting that information and getting a little bit wiser, and maybe people are converting over to truth instead of fiction at a faster rate. And once you get to the truth, you don't usually go back to the fiction. So it's a one-way thing. I think we're gaining momentum and winning. It's very encouraging.
I've been trying to understand the driving ideas underneath this globalist utopian tyranny that seems to be developing from the top down. And I think it's driven, at least in part, by this religious vision that I already described, that you have to construe culture itself, especially industrial culture, as the tyrannical father raping and pillaging everything in its way, which is an unbelievably dangerous way to think, too one-sided. And the idea that you have to impose limits to growth on people in order to have a sustainable planet. And that's allied with a view that probably stems all the way back to people like Paul Ehrlich in the 1960s, who really believe, truly, that maybe the planet should only have 500 million people on it, or 1 billion, in relative poverty, or 2 billion barely scraping by, because otherwise they're going to be wrecking everything, and controlled by some top-down authority that makes bloody well sure that no one's consuming too much. And so when I look at ideas like that first assumption, the planet has too many people on it, it's like, I don't like to hear people say that, because when I hear that, I think, okay, buddy, who exactly are you thinking about getting rid of? Oh, well, it's not like that. It's like, yeah, it's like that.
It has to be like that.
It is absolutely like that. And so, it's easy to get all paranoid conspiracy theorist about the WEF, say, and maybe there's some utility in that. But, I don't think anybody's sitting at Davos going, well, we got to scrap 7 billion people. But if the underlying narrative is the one I just described, virginal planet, tyrannical patriarchy, and rapacious individual, and you believe, well, we're overpopulated, like Paul Ehrlich has believed since really literally the mid-1960s, then how is it not going to be that the policies that you craft stemming from that narrative are colored by the belief that there's far too many people? And I've really felt that I've been at war for the last 6 months. And I would say it's war because what I observed happening in Europe when I was there last was that, well, and you can see this, you don't have to be in Europe to see it, but it's more direct if you're there, is that it's pretty damn clear that the globalist utopians are willing to sacrifice the poor for the sake of the planet. And they're doing that by cranking energy prices up through the roof, and that means that people die. Lomborg has estimated that maybe you have to turn your thermostat down by 3 degrees, right? Save the planet. We don't have enough energy. We'll pay you not to use your electricity between 5 and 6, which is what they're doing in the UK. You turn your damn thermostat down 3 degrees, that sounds like nothing. But if you're old, that radically increases the probability that you'll get a respiratory disease and die. And if the Europeans would have had a cold winter, and that could still happen, Lomborg estimated it'd wipe out 135,000 people. It's like, well, we're just making energy more expensive. It's like, what do you mean you're just doing that? So imagine the economic system. It's a pyramid. There's a bunch of people at the top. They have almost all the money. That's par for the course for any productive system. Any system that's productive ends up with a distribution like that. It's like a law of nature. And then you move farther down the pyramid till you get down to the bottom where most of the people are, and they're barely clinging on to the edge of reality, right? It doesn't take much of a crisis to tip them into, death. And then you crank up energy prices. Well, what happens is you just take a bunch of those people at the bottom of the distribution, the poor that the left is so, hypothetically concerned with, and they're just done. They go from barely hanging on to not hanging on. And their kids go from having some ghost of a chance of opportunity to having none. And I could see this coming. You really saw it happening in Germany and the UK, where we have this absolute rat's nest of way more expensive energy. And this is where it gets extremely perverse. You might say, okay, look, we have to save the future poor. And so now some of the present poor are going to have to suffer. Well, that's convenient for you if you happen not to be one of those poor people, but let's give the devil his due and say, okay. It's like, that'd be fine with me. Not really. That'd be fine with me if the consequence of your actions, raising energy prices, for example, actually produced an improvement in those things you wanted to improve. So, for example, energy is more expensive, but now the air is cleaner. But that isn't what's happened in Germany.
Right.
What's happened in Germany is energy is like 5 times as expensive, and the coal plants are back on. So it's like, even by your own criteria for success, you failed, and you did it at the expense of the poor. And, you know, the World Bank estimated, I don't remember how many months ago, it's probably 9 months ago, that we're putting 350 million people on the brink of starvation because we're cranking energy prices up. And so for me, it's like, that's 350 million people. That's 3 times as many as the communists killed, you know, in their 6 decades of trying. And if your cure for the planet is, well, you know, we got to put 350 million poor people in jeopardy just so that things are hypothetically better in 100 years, I think, yeah, I don't think so, buddy. And also, it's a little bit too convenient for me that your prescriptions to save the planet are accompanied by this insistence that the only way forward to that is to give you all the power. It's like there's a bit of a moral hazard in that, don't you think? It's like, I'm just saving the planet. Give me all the power. It's like, you want to save the planet, or do you want the power? And let's put the second one first, because the probability that you're a saint or the Messiah is pretty damn low. So that's the danger of the Davos crowd.
And then the Pfizer drop happened this week. Project Veritas made popular in every household a new phrase called directed evolution. And whether or not Pfizer is really doing gain of function and mRNA mutation and these sort of things that were claimed in those videos is, you know, up for debate. We're gonna dig into it and do some deep diving into it, because Project Veritas, I think oftentimes people look at that as a conclusion. Really, it's the start of an investigation. So what we know is the guy said these things, and then we're going to see if those things flesh out in reality or not. But it's a starting point. Also, Bill Gates, he's trashing mRNA vaccines. He's saying they don't work, they're not effective, these sort of things. Where was he 2 years ago? Wasn't he the guy touting it? So it's an interesting turnabout. He's become one of the richest people in the world because of his investments in these mRNA vaccines, and now he's going to come out and trash talk him. I think it's an interesting turnabout, and turnabout is fair play when it comes to lying to the public about COVID and millions of people being lost their jobs and lost their lives because of these sort of things. So they deserve more scrutiny.
Hey there, is this seat taken? You work for Pfizer. My question for you is, why does Pfizer want to hide from the public the fact that they're mutating the COVID viruses?
Is this real life? I'm literally a liar. I was trying to impress a person on a date by lying. This is absurd.
Please don't touch me.
So his defense is, I'm lying. I'm a liar.
I was trying to impress a person on a date.
Okay, by lying.
I have a question. So the lie that you feel would be impressive to a date is where the government's totally regulatory captured. That's how you get laid?
That's your... Hey, let me tell you how evil the company is I work for. Is your dick getting hard?
I can't. Not like I'm a producer. Like, you know, yeah, we're mutating an evil virus. We're gonna make a lot of money on it. No one will like it if they find out.
So if you haven't seen the first video, this guy is from Pfizer. This is that Veritas guy, and he just got him to admit a bunch of horrible stuff, that they're trying to mutate the virus so they can have a vaccine ready because it's all about money. And he talked about how the FDA, they have regulatory capture, and how the FDA goes easy on them because everybody wants to work at Pfizer. And so the head of the FDA goes to work at Pfizer, and they just approve all their drugs.
And last but not least, we have a special guest tonight, Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai. He's a MIT PhD who is very outspoken in the realm of the pandemic, the vaccines, and some of what he calls the grifters in the movement.
And remember, these people are part of the establishment. And this is a naivete people need to get over. These people are absolutely part of the establishment. This is why academics, you see, there's talking about the truth, and then there's action. If you just simply talk about the truth and you don't take any action to mobilize people, that's what academics do. They write beautiful books years later after the massacre occurs here or there, and that's how they get to maintain their academic positions. All right. Other people just will take action without any basis in truth. Those are called terrorists. They just go do crazy shit. Okay. And other people tell half truths and they delay it. And these people do this because they know their viewership is lazy. They want viewers who are lazy, that they outsource their attention to them. We'll come back to this, but fundamentally there's a dynamic here. So anyone like Tucker Carlson, okay, who knew what was going on, because when you take our lawsuit, we have it all documented. People go to winbackfreedom.com. When we discovered the backdoor portal into Twitter, we did it, not Stephen Miller, not the Twitter files, not Elon Musk. It was myself, acting pro se in our lawsuit where we were fighting the government in our trenches. On October 15, 2020, we wrote to Tucker Carlson, Tucker, you should cover this. October 30th, after we won our lawsuit in the preliminary injunction hearing, where the judge was appalled when we found out that the social media director tells him that they have a VIP portal backdoor into Twitter, and they use that portal to silence a U.S. Senate candidate who is exposing government officials. It's in black and white. It's in transcripts. We put it up. It's been up there close to 3 years now. Tucker Carlson was notified about this, Glenn Greenwald and the ACLU. They did nothing. Why? And this will get to the heart of the issue. Why didn't they do anything in October of 2020? I'll tell you why. Because A, they knew that I represented somebody who was not part of the left wing or the right wing. I represented a bottoms up movement that had arose in Massachusetts. 3,000 people, bottoms up, millions of people all over the world supported our election campaign. We had exposed the fundamental issue of real issues with the elections, ballot images being deleted, chain of custody and signature verification, not the other bullshit that started getting put out there to sell pillows. Okay. Nice guy selling pillows. And a lot of people, grifters like Jack Posobiec, who's grifter Maximus, getting codes to sell pillows. And they subsumed all the other real issues, and election integrity became a right-wing issue, not an American issue. That's what harm these guys did. But the bottom line is we exposed Fauci. We ran the Fire Fauci campaign in 2020. In January 6th of 2020, we ran one of the biggest protests in New Jersey where we stopped the vaccine mandates as COVID was hitting the shores here. And what were these guys doing? Robert Kennedy literally drove his little SUV around and was telling people, oh, Shiva's going to hurt the Democrats in negotiating in backroom discussions. It was our militant movements on the bottom ground which stopped that vaccine mandate. What was Tucker Carlson doing? Nothing. He waited until early November 2022. In October 30th, 2022 is when The Intercept drops their DHS leaks. This is before the Twitter files. Why do they do that? Well, October 28th is when Elon Musk bought Twitter. On 29th, I did a post on Facebook. I still was banned off Twitter for now 2 years at that point. And I said, Elon, there's a backdoor portal. Call me. Here's my phone number. And you need to take that down day one. The next day, The Intercept drops their DHS leak saying, aha, we found this. The FBI is involved with Twitter. Well, if you look at our censorship diagram on winbackfreedom.com, that's only one component. There was a little tip of the iceberg. They forgot everything else. What did they forget? They forgot that the oligarch called Pierre Omidyar, who owns The Intercept, funds them, runs them, funded them, and is their founder, is the one who funded the Center for Internet Security, which created that backdoor portal into Twitter. So they conveniently leave that out. This is known as a classic limited hangout.
So we're going to hear from him later tonight. And to kick it off, as always, here's Luke Rudkowski with his report from earlier today. And let's get his summary for the week.
After collapsing on the football field.
After collapsing in the middle of the game.
Collapsing during the game.
Collapsing on the tennis court.
Suddenly collapsing.
The player
collapsed and died
after collapsing.
Are you tired of being called a conspiracy theorist? Do you see patterns where other people don't? Are your relationships with your friends and family suffering as a result? Well, then ask your doctor about Noticenol. Noticenol is an FDA-approved drug that helps people afflicted by chronic noticing. It works by suppressing the part of your brain responsible for critical thinking so you can get back to living carefree. Side effects of taking Noticenol may include, but are not limited to, heart attacks, sudden adult death syndrome, storming the Capitol, unironically enjoying late-night television, and in rare cases, Bryant's Deltoritis. People who take Noticenol once a day report up to a 97% decrease in noticing. Do your own research to find out if Noticenol is right for you.
You can't stop coincidences from happening, but you can stop noticing them. And now, for more severe cases, try extra-strength Noticenol.
Oh my... I bet they're probably already putting it in the public drinking water.
What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happened. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions and we can get into the show and share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man.